Alright, is everything ready? I think it's ready now. Rough start to the morning. Tried to have breakfast. Tried to just have some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for breakfast. And I swear there's nothing worse than old jelly where the sugars inside of it has started to crystallize. Because there's nothing worse than crunchy jelly. I know, first world problems, but still. Blech. Bad. Anyway, everything looks good. That's off, that's off, that's off. The stream is on. And so I think we're about ready to get started. So let's go ahead and make that go away. And I will say hello, Shadowcat back, and today I was inspired. I was actually inspired by an article that I saw earlier this week, and I wanted to talk about it. Let me get things adjusted over here on my auxiliary so I can actually see my chat. That looks good. And I see that JP is already in the chat this morning. Hello, JP. Good to see you. I'm actually kind of regretting this stream. See, I didn't have this a lot planned out ahead of time, but I also just realized that today is the 24-hour marathon, I guess, for Extra Life. And Extra Life, actually, you know what? Since I'm talking about it, I'm going to pull it up. Extra Life. See, I'm not doing anything for it this year, but I'm going to shout it out anyway, just because, you know, it deserves to be shouted out. But today is the 15th birthday of Extra Life. It is a charity thing for the Children's Miracle Network hospitals. And I am not participating in it this year because it only just occurred to me a couple of days ago that I'm technically a YouTuber. I do streams, and I could totally have done this year. And it just kind of dawned on me, it's like, you know, you get online and you watch people who do stuff like this. Suddenly I am one of those people. It's kind of like when you finally realize you're an adult and it's like, huh, no way, I can actually do things. So unfortunately, I mean, I really should have been doing this instead, but maybe next year. Maybe next year. I have to think, or I have to plan around this next time. So we're not going to do this, but that might be that might be fun next year. So no, we're just going to go ahead with our lecture today. But now you know what's going on. So if, just on the off chance, if you would like to donate money, there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who are currently streaming for 24 hours right now doing the Extra Life thing, and you can go support them. I'm going to be doing my part later too. Anyway though, today I wanted to have a conversation because earlier this week there was an opinion piece that came out from the Free Press, and I shared it in the Discord server. So if you are in the Discord server, you have already seen it. And if you're not in the Discord server, why aren't you in the Discord server? You should come hang out with us. It's usually pretty quiet, but you know what? The times when it's not quiet are super fun. Anyway, I shared an opinion piece in the article from the Free Press, and they were talking about They were talking about what they're calling the Great Betrayal, which is to say, how do I really want to approach this? Because this is going to be kind of a sensitive issue stream. It's going to be kind of a historical stream. It's going to be kind of a philosophy stream. The question is, how do I want to approach this? Last week, we were talking about all the controversies that are going on right now. And I ended it talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. You can call it the Israel-Gaza conflict, you call it the Israel-Hamas conflict, but let's be honest. It's kind of just the Israel versus everybody conflict at this point. And this has been divisive for everybody. It's one of those weird things where people will not talk about it for the longest time, but as soon as something happens, everybody is automatically on a side. There's like no middle ground on it. And even the people who try to claim a middle ground do so disingenuously. So obviously, we discussed, and if you haven't watched my previous streams, you probably still know about the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. And the reactions to that have been varied. There have been some people that have been condemning it. There have been a lot of people condemning it. There have also been a lot of people celebrating it. And there has even been physical violence between people who both oppose and support what's going on. What's really, really interesting about this, however, are the people who have found themselves caught on the wrong side of the conflict. And when I say caught on the wrong side, I do not mean the Palestinians or the Gazans, who are, and I will actually agree with this one, trapped. Because Gaza has been called an open-air prison, and I have a hard time disagreeing with that. Mostly because the Gaza territory is that there's almost no way out of it. There's only really 3 ways out of Gaza. Number 1, there are several ports between Gaza and Israel, and obviously those are currently closed. For rather obvious reasons. There are also ports, apparently, and these are the only ones that I know of, personally. There might be more. There's also ports between Gaza and Egypt, which, as far as I know, are also currently closed because Egypt does not want to take refugees right now. And then, of course, Gaza does have water access, and so technically, you could swim for it. I don't know where you're going, I don't know how far you're getting, but I believe you could. I'm not sure, though. Anyway, though, I'm not talking about the people that are currently trapped in Gaza, and I'm not talking about the hostages that were taken to Gaza. I'm also not talking about prisoners of war that were captured by Israel. What I'm talking about, however, is people who have aligned themselves with a political or social ideology, who are only now realizing what they have signed on to and what they have bought into. Because a lot of people are getting a very harsh wake-up call right now that what they thought that they were supporting may not have been what they were actually supporting. And so before we get into that, we're going to go into a little bit of foundation for our conversation. I see that Tux is in here. Tux just says, yeah, Kat, just start streaming without me. I don't need your permission. I am an adult. JP says, I usually watch some of the Rooster Teeth Extra Life content. Yeah, I don't usually watch a whole lot of it. I'm usually busy keeping up with other things. But yeah, next year I think I'm going to do Extra Life. I don't know how you sign up for it, or what you're supposed to do for it, but next year, I'm going to do it. And I see that Blizz is in the chat. Hello, Blizz. Good to have you here. Okay, now, let's get into foundation, because we got to have somewhere to work from. We have to have some kind of common ground. We have to have a point to branch off from. And when I was thinking about it, I thought there is really, and given that this is kind of the crux of the issue in the first place, there is really no better foundation that we can lay than Black Lives Matter. And the reason why is because when we're talking about this, and I talk about the left, let's understand what we're talking about, and then we'll understand why Black Lives Matter is the perfect example of the left. And the reason is this. Leftism, modern leftism, progressivism, modern liberalism, whatever you want to call it, is... a lot of people have a hard time defining it, but while nailing down a single specific definition for what the left is might be hard, we can use generalities to help define what they are. When we talk about the left, we talk about progressivism in these things. What are we talking about? We are talking about a political ideology that focuses primarily on the minority. Okay? It focuses on things like minority rights. It focuses on things like minority prejudices or prejudices against minorities. It focuses on systemic inequalities. What else? It focuses on the curtailing of individual rights. Sometimes. We'll get into that, though. It focuses basically on trying to lift up those who are being held down by something, whether that be historical ills, modern ills, prejudices, laws, whatever those things happen to be. This is why, if you look through history and you look at the left, you see that the left is the home for all of your racial minorities. Blacks, Asians, Indigenous, South Pacific Islanders, all of those. Basically, anybody who is not European in some way tends to fall under the banner of the left, simply because when you talk about Western civilization and Western democracies, it is primarily and by majority European, white, Christian, and so somebody needs to speak out for the little guy. And this has always been the case. If you go, as far back as like the 1960s, when they were talking about things like rebelling against the normal social structures, they were talking about the rights for women, the rights for, minorities, blacks, Asians, people like that. They were also getting a little into the gender stuff, where they were talking about, gay rights, or at least gay respect. And that has continued through to the modern day. Now, on its face, this is actually a good thing, which is why it's gotten so far. It is a good thing that there are groups out there who do this. There are very few people, I think, that are going to come out and say that groups like the Anti-Defamation League were bad from the start. Now, there are going to be people who are going to come out and say that it's bad now, and I'm one of them. But groups like the Southern Poverty Law Network, the ADL, which we just discussed, many of these groups were created with a very, very specific purpose in mind, and it was a very good one. It's actually very similar to my opinion on unions, because I am not a union supporter. However, I do believe that I am not a union supporter because I think that they have outlived their usefulness. Unions were absolutely necessary during the time they were created. However, since then, the unions have fought and won for many of the rights that they said that they wanted. They wanted worker protections. They wanted labor standards. They wanted all of these things. And they got them. The problem is now that the unions persist. And as a group that struggles to create its own purpose, it just continues to demand more and more and more. So too is true with groups like the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center. SPLC. These are groups that absolutely had a reason for being when they were created. But much like, who is it? Jesse Jackson, I think? They have kind of completed their goal. They won. They got everything they were asking for. And now they search. They have to scrape for anything to continue to justify their existence. Now, many of these places will always continue to exist because there will always be issues for them. However, whether it's enough of an issue to support what they currently are is another story that we're not going to get into. But we need to lay that foundation so that we know that there are actually reasons why the left has taken in all of these groups and taken on all of these burdens and responsibilities. And again, I do believe that Black Lives Matter truly exemplifies all of it. It's the perfect poster child for the left. The reason being that Black Lives Matter, when it started, and there is some argument over this, but I'm going to be very generous and I'm going to dismiss the arguments against it, just out of hand. The idea when Black Lives Matter started was very, very simple. What they saw was, back in the 1960s, before the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, black people did not have equal rights. They were no longer slaves, but they were no longer full citizens either. They did not have equal access, they did not have equal opportunity, they did not have equal rights to things like vote. And so they marched and protested until they got it. The response, however, to the protests and the activism during the Civil Rights era was nothing short of barbaric. The police were absolutely brutal when they went out and did it. They used water cannons, they used dogs, they used bullets, both non-lethal and lethal. When blacks said that they fought for their rights, that was not, they were sugarcoating it. And they won. Now here is where things start to kind of go south. And it's one of the complaints that I've had about what I would call black culture for a long time. Because after they won, many people were keen to just say, great, we got what we wanted, and they went on and lived better lives. But many people, especially and particularly in the leadership during the Civil Rights era, could not let it go. We also discussed this a little bit when we were talking about reparations. Because how do you get reparations for something like that? The fact is that you can't. There is no monetary value, there is no physical price that you can put on what happened there. You can't do it for the Civil Rights era, you sure as hell can't do it for slavery. So there's really nothing you can do there except forgive and move on. For many people, that's very hard. For some people, it's impossible. And some simply don't because they choose not to. And those that choose not to, who decide to carry that flame of abuse and oppression, they're the ones that we're going to be talking about today. Because those people have poisoned what I would call black culture. Now, when I say black culture, there's two sides to this. I mean, there is black culture. There is black history. There is a lot of stuff there that is actually very interesting and very good. There is a flip side to that coin, though, that is very destructive. And it is the side of the coin that says, white people hate black people. Doesn't matter what they say, doesn't matter what they do. Just assume, just know that all white people have always and will always hate black people. It's the side of the coin that says the police have only one purpose, and that is to abuse, control, and murder blacks. It is the side that said that the entire reason for the United States existing goes back to the year 1619, when people carrying slaves from England came here to make sure that they could perpetuate the illegal slave trade that England was trying to stop. It is the side that seeks to divide, to tear down, and destroy everything that has been built, and for no other reason than pure spite and hatred. There are numerous examples and reasons why all of these things are not true. The United States, for all of its faults, is one of the greatest multicultural places in the world. We have a rich multicultural population here, and by and large, almost everybody gets along with everybody else. There are very, very few ethnic enclaves left in the United States. Almost everybody knows people who are of different races, and most people get along just fine. Until you have somebody who comes in to stir up trouble. When it comes to the police, we are a population of 325-ish million people. And there are hundreds of thousands of police interactions every day. The vast majority of them, supremely over 99%, are just fine. The police are not out to get people. Not generally. Now, the higher profile you get, then we can start having those conversations, because then you're talking about people directing the police at you. But in general, the day-to-day people on the streets, the police are just fine. And the entire idea of the U.S. being founded in 1619 on the basis of slavery is so ridiculously absurd that it has not actually been accepted in any kind of academic situation. Short of a few niche, and I do mean niche, college classes on U.S. history that have been all but discredited. But we can talk about that later. I lay this foundation to talk about Black Lives Matter because when Black Lives Matter started, it had a very good purpose. It did say that in the black community, there is still discrimination, especially between the police and the black community. And it is true. There were concerns of things like police brutality. Now, we can try to excuse these things and say that, most of your crime-ridden places tend to be majority black. However, that is an explanation, but not an excuse. You can explain it all day, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be better. An excuse says that this is the way things are and it doesn't need to be better, but it could be. And so when Black Lives Matter started, it had a goal, and that was to improve things. Ostensibly, it was to improve things, and I'm not going to question that. Again, I said I'm going to dismiss all the other arguments against it right now. They wanted to improve things. And it says right here, we can look at it right here, it says the date, 2013, okay? It's been going for a long time, 10 years old this year. But most people hadn't even heard of it. Not until 2020. Because in 2020, of course, there was the George Floyd incident, which is still hotly debated. And so I am not going to call it the George Floyd murder. I'm not going to call it the George Floyd killing. I'm just going to call it the incident. At which point, Black Lives Matter took front and center stage and said that, you know what? We cannot stand this anymore. He was put on the ground, and some cops sat on him for 9 minutes, and he died. And it became a major flashpoint in Western culture. And not only that, but it had a weird effect. See, most people, when they think of, what happened in 2020, they will think about riots and destruction and fights between blacks and the police and everything else. And we're going to get into that. But what I really want to touch on right here is what happened before that. Before the riots, but after Floyd died. Because for a very, very brief time there, a period of only maybe a few weeks, there was solidarity. Because it really didn't matter which side you were on. Whether you were right, whether you were left, whether you were liberal, conservative, whether you were Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever. Most people looked at what happened and said, This was bad. And almost everybody asked, how could this have been avoided? You saw everybody marching together saying, why did this happen? Is it because the police did wrong? Is it because he did something wrong? Was there a failure in the system? Or was it all just a terrible tragedy that couldn't be avoided? We don't know. We're never going to know. But for one brief period of time, everybody came together. And then it all went to hell. Because then, as most of us who lived through it know, if you paid attention to the news at all, we had what was called the Summer of Love. And it was named so because of a mayor, I do believe in Seattle, who said that she wanted it to be like a summer of love. Instead, it turned into a summer of carnage. It was riots, it was looting, it was arsons, it was murders. It was actual attacks on the United States, as places like the Chaz Zone or different autonomous zones decided to pop up around the country, declaring themselves to be completely independent from the US, a sovereign enclave inside. None of them lasted long, but the fact that they even tried is significant. The fact that they actually were able to expel people from their homes and deny actual, servants of the state from entering. And I won't talk about what happened in them. Again, subject for a different time. Any goodwill that was there basically evaporated. And the only people that were left were the people who actually sided with Black Lives Matter and who were okay with what was going on. And that's kind of the reason that we're talking about this today, because during that one brief time, almost everybody flocked to Black Lives Matter. And then, shortly thereafter, many of them regretted it when groups carrying that name started to burn down entire cities. And a lot of people had a lot of regrets then. But a lot of people didn't. Many people who were on the left in various different groups were still keen to support Black Lives Matter while they were doing this. And they made various excuses for it, saying, while we don't support the damage being done, we do understand why they're doing it. Or many people went back to that old chestnut of violence is the language of the unheard. And these people are simply trying to be heard. Or you even had some people who came out and boldly said that, these people live with nothing. These people are downtrodden and impoverished, and this is simply the only way that they can make a living, is by looting. Either way, you had many people who made every single excuse they could for the group. But then, after, things died down over a couple of years, and, everyone was still quietly supporting Black Lives Matter, something happened. Isreal was attacked. And when Isreal was attacked, let's see, actually, I should really have had this page a little bit further up. Which one was that? Which tab was it? Didn't I have that one pulled up? No, wait, it's right here. Yeah. So, anyway, after the attack on Isreal, and I'm just going to move this one over here. There we go. It was here, wasn't it? Oh, maybe it wasn't this one. Actually, that's close enough, though. I really wanted to have the picture of the hang glider, but maybe not. No, wait, there it is. I found it. I did have it pulled up. Here it is. So, after the attack on Isreal, this popped up. And this caused a whole lot of problem. Because as I said before when we started this, when it comes to the whole Israel-Palestine thing, basically when you bring Israel up at all, it causes a lot of issues. Because it immediately divides everybody. Everybody takes a side. There is no middle ground when it comes to Israel. And so when they threw this up, of course, it also pushed people into picking a side. Again, I don't know why they do or why this happens, but it just happens every time. So people were pushed into picking a side. Who do you stand with in this conflict? And BLM Chicago, and as far as I know, it was only BLM Chicago who did this. They decided they were going to throw up this. It's one of the paragliders that invaded Israel, carrying the Palestinian flag, and we know what happened on that day. And when this came out, it sent waves through society. And the reason it sent waves through society is because many of the people who had been supporting BLM before were also supporting Israel, because several of those people might have been, and many of them were, very left-leaning Jewish people. Or if they weren't Jewish, maybe they were Christian. Or even if they weren't Christian or Jewish, maybe they just thought that what happened was some kind of atrocity because over 1,400 people were killed, and many more were captured. And so when this came out, it forced them to look at their own group, the people around them that they thought that they knew, that they thought they trusted, and say, what are you doing? I'm actually on that team. If I had been there, then these people from Gaza, these Hamas soldiers might have killed me. And you're saying that you support this. Are you saying that you would like to see me dead? And this began a big wake-up call for many people on the left who had joined that team, because so this isn't the first time. See, this came out just recently. If I look at this, this was published on October 10th, 2023, so 3 days after the attack. I don't know when the actual image was created. However, you can see people that were out there and holding up signs and banners and flags and everything else for Palestine. What many people did not know, however, is that this was never new. And this is kind of the crux of today's discussion. So I want to take a bit of a trip back. Now, it's hard to find a good news article from the appropriate time, because right now, if you type Israel into Google, on top of how censorized Google tends to be in general, but if you type in Israel into Google, all you're going to get is the current news. So this is the best I come up with, and this is from June 12th in 2021. Now, there's a 7-minute listen here, there's a long article here, we're not going to read it, not all of it. But this says the complicated history behind BLM's solidarity with the pro-Palestinian movement. And if we read a little bit of it, it says many Black Lives Matter activists have taken to the streets across the U.S. in recent weeks to voice their support for pro-Palestinian causes, including calls against Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the U.S.-Israel alliance. 11 days of fighting between Israel and Hamas in the last month, the worst in the region since 2014, left at least 256 people dead in Gaza. The United Nations reports, and 13 people have died in Israel, according to Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The latest round of violence has renewed a sense of solidarity with the pro-Palestinian movement among some BLM organizers in the U.S., where sympathy with the Palestinians in the broader conflict has been growing. Now, there is more to this, and I don't want to read all of it, but primarily, it says right here, behind the connection between the two movements is a complicated history of a fissure among earlier generations of African American activists that helped form what Zelly Thomas, an organizer with Black Lives Matter in Paterson, New Jersey, calls a black radical tradition. There is a saying. Actually, there's a couple of sayings we're going to get into, but there's a saying, ignorance is bliss. Because what you don't know, well, it's not going to make you unhappy. If you just don't think about it, then you won't worry about it. There's also another saying, however, and that is that you can ignore politics, but politics will not ignore you. And when we talk about the difference between ignorance and politics, this is primarily the reason. And now we're going to get to the actual article. The Great Betrayal. Now again, this is a long article. Most of it is testimonies, so we are not going to read it. However, on the subject of ignorance being bliss, and politics will not ignore you even if you ignore it, the fact is, none of this is new. None of this is a surprise to anyone except the people who are actually on the side of the left. Many people on the right, many conservatives, or many people that just don't fall under the great big umbrella that is leftism, have been warning about this for a very long time. It's just now that it's coming to them that they're realizing what's going on. So we will read a little bit of this. It says, after Donald Trump was elected, Emily Rose, 51 years old, flew to New York with her daughters to walk in the Women's March. She demonstrated on the streets of Minneapolis, where she lives, in the days after George Floyd's murder. She donated money to small Black-led movements and social justice organizations that she believed in. She unlearned and then re-educated herself as white Americans were instructed to, and read the teachings of anti-racist scholars like Ta-Nehisi Coates. But then, after the massacre in Israel on October 7th, when some 1,400 Jews were brutally murdered, not to mention the rapes, beheadings, and instances of torture, with no mention of the actual people abducted and being held prisoner, Rose began to notice something odd from the cohort of fellow progressives she admired. They were cheering for the other side. Quote, I started to see these intelligent, educated people whose mission is to make our system better for people of color suddenly posting all of this anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian stuff, Rose said. I'm not changing my values, but screw the allyship. I will not stop fighting because I believe in the causes themselves. But as for going out of my way to support or post or give money, I'm done. While professional politicos like DSA founder Maurice Isreal are publicly stepping down from their parties and denouncing organizations that justify or even cheer the events of October 7th, and wealthy Jewish donors claw back their millions from elite universities they say help foment anti-Semitism on their campuses, there's a quieter, more personal reckoning happening among progressive Jews. Like Rose, they feel betrayed by a left that they thought would have their backs. Now, the rest of this article is mostly testimonials. So Dove 30, Josh Gilman 37, Nate Clark, and I don't want to go through all the different testimonials. You get the idea. The fact is that these people are, I think, almost exclusively Jews. But this is not a phenomenon that is exclusive to the Jews. It is a shared experience of anybody who saw what happened on October 7th and was horrified by it, and who happened to be on the left and was equally horrified by the praise, support, and celebration of what happened. There's a big problem here, though, and that is that, as I said before, this isn't new. This article came out on November 4th. Or no, wait, that's today's date. This article came out on October 30th. Excuse me. Huh. Oh yeah, current date and time. Check that out. No, this article came out on October 30th, so 4 days ago. 5 days ago? It was this week. And many of these people just now are realizing who they have been aligning themselves with this entire time. But as we pointed out back here, this is not new. This has been going on the entire time. And so when I said that, ignorance is bliss, this is true. You can be ignorant, you can be happy. But even though you ignore politics, politics will not ignore you. And that's what this is. You can maybe say this is a religious thing, but you have to keep in mind that when it comes to, groups like Hamas, their religion is their politics. They believe that not only do they have a mandate from God to do this, it is actually part of their culture, part of their government to do these things. So, it's come for them. So, I was going to touch on this. I think I've already pretty well covered this, but I want to talk about the Summer of Love. I pretty much did this. There's a long list of things here, but this was just going to talk about all the damage that was done and the people that supported it. I think we can more or less skip this at this point. Why are you here? Go away. Instead, I think that we're going to move on. Because, like I said, none of this is new. And it wasn't exclusive to Black Lives Matter. I have used Black Lives Matter as kind of the center point for this because it was a very prominent example. But it wasn't the only example. Because as I advertised when I said this, I said that, people can change, but ideas generally don't. And what we're talking about here today is an idea. It's not just Black Lives Matter that had very anti-Semitic views. And as a matter of fact, anti-Semitism is nothing new. I was going to talk about that later. But what I want to talk about right now is the fact that it wasn't just them. And I thought about a great example. I tried to figure out what the best example would be. And I couldn't come up with a better one than this one. This is from the AFLC. This is the America Freedom Law Center. And this is a case out of New York. Cuomo and de Blasio embrace BLM protests but suspend the First Amendment for all others. What had happened essentially was, this was all during COVID times. We all remember the COVID times. We all lived through the COVID times. We remember. And we remember that everyone was told to mask up. Everyone was told to maintain social distancing. Okay? We were also told not to go outside. Don't go outside, they said. Don't go near anybody. Don't go to the store unless it's absolutely necessary. Don't go to work unless you are what was the word? Unless you were I forgot the term. Basically, unless you were needed. You were a necessary worker. There was a term for it, and I don't remember what it is now. So don't do any of that stuff. At the same time, they also said don't go to church. Don't go to synagogue. They didn't say don't go to temple, but that's because I think they knew better. Or not go to the mosque. Synagogue, temple, same thing. You weren't allowed to go there. But BLM had the full authority and grace from the governor, the mayor, and the police to have all the protests they wanted in the streets, to go wherever they felt they wanted to do whatever they wanted to. And so many lawsuits were filed against New York and New York City over this, what is really a First Amendment violation. Now, for things like churches, it was bad. However, many people still found ways to pray together. What was really interesting, though, was how he handled the Jews. And JP said essential workers. Yes, that was it. I couldn't remember the term, but yes, they were essential workers. So, during all of this, when Black Lives Matter was literally marching through the streets shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, with hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of people, special police were actually brought in to make sure that all synagogues were shut down. Now, there were places that were going after churches and saying that, churches could not be attended as well. But for synagogues, and especially in Jewish communities, it wasn't enough to simply have the city police there. They had to bring in state police as well, because many of the city police had sympathies with the communities that they worked in. State police, of course, had none of those. And every time that Jews would go through and try to have their services and whatnot, they would go through and make sure that the doors were chained shut. They even went so far as to weld gates in place to make sure that none of these things could be done. They prevented Jews from gathering, either in a synagogue or even in public, and they shut them down with threats upon their businesses, threats upon their temples, threats upon everything. And it was really kind of interesting to watch it because it begged the question of why them? Why them in particular? And I think the reason is actually very simple. And while we can't prove it, not without, some form of telepathy, I think it's pretty obvious to say that whether we can call him an anti-Semite or not might be a bit much, but Cuomo obviously hated the Jews for some reason. And so he was trying to break them. He was trying to oppress them. He was trying to keep them down. I don't want to really speak too much more on that because anything more than that would be speculation, and all I really want to talk about is what was done. And what was done is just that. But now we look more to today. And we've seen across today, not just in New York, but at almost all major universities across the country, and not even just across the country, across the Western Hemisphere, whether it's in the US or Canada or Britain or probably a myriad of other European countries that I haven't heard from yet, but we have seen student groups getting up and protesting in favor of Palestine. Now, on its face, I actually don't take a side. If students want to protest, even if I think their protest is stupid, and I unabashedly think their protest is stupid, they are allowed to do it. I am not going to say they do not have their right to protest. But this is a case of, well, it should not be illegal. It should be unconscionable. And it speaks less to the legality of our system and the rights of our system and more to the moral structure of the system. Because nobody should even think that this was a good idea. The fact that they are supporting a group that is across the world recognized as a terrorist organization, who has performed terrorist activities and has committed mass murder. This is what they're supporting. Speaks volumes, not just to who they are as people, but to the society they are living in, to the morals they are teaching, and to the education they have received. And the backlash to it has been swift. Let's see, before I get to that one, no, I'll get to that one first. Yeah, let's go ahead and move that one over here. So, after all of these students came out to protest, we found out that, well, the world has been paying attention. Remember what I said before. There is no middle ground on this. Everybody picks a side when it comes to Israel. And so when all the students decided they were going to march out in support of Palestine and against Israel, well, the world was watching. And the world disapproved. So here it says Harvard students, but the truth is that it's not just Harvard. It is any university students, because after this started, many major businesses and corporations started paying attention to all of the university campuses where this was going on. But in this one in particular, Harvard students will be blacklisted by Wall Street after joining 34 organizations that blamed Israel for the Palestine war. That is to say, that every single student who joined one of these organizations will no longer be accepted if they apply to any job that is either in or associated with Wall Street. Now, when I say that, keep in mind that Wall Street is the home of the stock market, and the stock market has ties to pretty much every single major corporation and industrial sector in the world. Or at least in the US, but most of them are also international to some degree. They've all screwed themselves, and many of them realized it, because as it says, Harvard students who blamed Israel for the massacre of its citizens by Hamas had their own future thrown into doubt last night as a host of blue-chip CEOs, a term I'm not actually familiar with, declared them unemployable. So all of these students who are in Harvard, probably for some kind of business deal, whether that be an actual business degree or just to gain the contacts they need to get into business, have essentially flushed their entire education and future down the drain. And again, this spread. It wasn't just Harvard, it was all of them. I believe I heard the words Cornell come up several times, so that one was also included, and I'm going to assume that other places like Yale and other ones, I believe Penn State is also on that list. All of them that had these groups come out, they're all being blacklisted. And it's not just the students who were going through and, joining these pro-Palestine activist groups. Even so much as your own actions could do it. Not that one, not that one. Is it this one? Aha, yes. So another thing that's been going on around here has been people who know others in Israel, or people who just share some kind of tie, either by blood or faith, or just values with Israel, have been putting up posters. Now, the posters are supposedly of anybody who was kidnapped, but seeing as how I don't know how they know who or what was kidnapped, I couldn't say. Regardless, though, I guess if they find out anybody who was kidnapped, they are putting up pictures of them, just to remind people that these people still exist, that they are still alive, that they still need our help. Now, this has been a bit of a flashpoint, because as they're putting the posters up, you have other groups who are coming in and taking them down. Now, this has actually been a big problem over in the United Kingdom more than it has been in the US, where in the United Kingdom, they have had police going through not just tearing down the posters, but also arresting people for putting them up in the first place. They say that it is for inflaming tensions in the neighborhoods because the posters are inflammatory. Which, while I can understand their argument there, I don't believe that it quite paints them in the position they think it does. And let's see, Tuck says, I will say that this is kind of propaganda because none of those missing people are in the US or even in the West. But I approve of putting up the posters anyway. No, I will agree with that. As I said, I'm not even sure if we can prove that these people exist. Because unless Gaza has a roster of people that they have taken names, ages, nationalities, all of that stuff, and released it to the world, I don't see how these posters can be accurate. But I support putting them up anyway, if for no other reason than it does point out that yes, they are still holding prisoners. And until Hamas has been dealt with, I see no reason not to continuously remind people of that. Prisoners of war is not something that you just let go. But people are tearing them down. And it's a very interesting point, because how you react to it really says a whole lot about who you are as a person. Now, I have talked at length about the concept of evil, and I do believe this is one of those cases where it's actually pretty well defined, because the act of putting up a poster is completely harmless. The act of tearing down the poster is completely harmless. And as such, with nobody being harmed one way or the other, all we have is a pure expression of intention. And that is that in putting the posters up, your intention is to bring awareness to what is happening. By tearing them down, you seek to divert or suppress any attention from it. And by doing so, you show where your support is. The people who are putting up the posters trying to bring attention to people that are being held prisoner are clearly in support of the people who are being held prisoner. By tearing them down, you show yourself to be in support of the people holding them prisoner. And so, as I said, it is a very, very interesting case of showing your true intentions and really revealing yourself who you are. So with the protests going on, and students and even other people tearing down these posters, we can see what's happening on a larger scale. So here we have donors pulling support from Harvard, UPenn fails to condemn Hamas terrorist attack. Basically what we're seeing is all these places where these posters are getting torn down, all these places with these student groups that are coming out, they're all losing their support. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting because, circling back to the point that I made earlier, all of these people, all of these donors to these major universities, all these people who were funding these student organizations, they had thrown their support in with people that they thought they knew. People they thought that supported them. People they thought had their own morals and values in line. And also, people that they never, ever questioned once. Because it would have been too much effort for them. After all, you're already supporting them. So why would you need to check up on them? Why would you need to care? And besides that, even if they are doing something that, would be slightly distasteful, if you don't know about it, well, then number one, you have plausible deniability. But also, if you don't know about it, you don't have to worry about it. Ignorance is bliss. But then it came for them. Now you have all of these universities which you did not keep an eye on for years, if not decades, who have been teaching their students all manner of things that were probably worthless to begin with, and putting ideas and morals and values that are absolutely counter and contrary to your own into their heads. And now you see the fruits of the labor. Because all of these big donors did not put stipulations on what the money could be used for, or did not look to see what the universities were doing before they signed a big check. Now these universities have churned out class after class after class, generation after generation of students who, and let's not sugarcoat this, hate them. These are groups of students who have been raised to be anti-Semites. They have been raised on media that is anti-Semitic. They have been taught by teachers who are anti-Semitic, teaching them curriculums that were at their core anti-Semitic. And now that all of those students have grown up and been thoroughly indoctrinated, it's only now, after the damage has been done, that these people realized just who they had thrown their lot in with. And so we've talked about Black Lives Matter, we talked about New York City, we talked about the big universities. What do they all have in common? We have an activist group, we have a political sphere, we have major education institutions. What do they have in common? And the one thing they have in common is the ideology. It's the ideas. Now, we're going to get a little bit historical here. We're going to get a little bit historical. The first thing I want to pull up is this. This is just a document. This is from the Anti-Defamation League. See? Told you we're going to get to these guys. This is from the Anti-Defamation League. And this is it's just 4 pages, right? Yeah, it's 4 pages. We're not going to read it. But this is just a brief history of anti-Semitism. It starts off with a definition. We'll read that. It says, anti-Semitism refers to a prejudice and or discrimination against Jews as individuals or a group. Anti-Semitism is based on stereotypes and myths that target Jews as people, their religious practices and beliefs, and the Jewish state of Israel. Historically, what began as conflict over religious beliefs has evolved into a systematic policy of political, economic, and social isolation, exclusion, degradation, and attempted annihilation. It did not begin with the Nazi era, nor did it end with the close of World War II. Its continuance over the millennia speaks to the power of scapegoating a group that is defined as the other. And they are not wrong about that. Interestingly enough, believe it or not though, their definition is wrong. Anti-Semitism in a modern context speaks of the Jews. However, anti-Semitism in its classical definition just refers to the people of that region, the Semites. Semites? Either way, the people of that region, regardless of your faith, regardless of your bloodline, the people of that region are Semites. It's just that most of those people have expanded. I mean, Islam now covers so much of the world that calling them Semites is kind of pointless because it doesn't speak to all Muslims, whereas almost all Jews are centered in that area, and so it was called anti-Semitism. But we'll just briefly go through this. There's biblical times where it talked about, the conflicts between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Anti-Judaism after the advent of Christianity, through the Middle Ages. Of course, Jews were forbidden to marry Christians, prohibited from holding positions in government, and prevented from appearing as witnesses against Christians in court. They were ostracized with bizarre fantasies about Jews. Okay? Not going to read through all of it, though. There's modern anti-Semitism, which started primarily in Germany back in the late 1800s. But we know where that went from there, because even after that started, it just continued to grow and grow and grow. In Russia, although most Jews themselves were extremely poor, they were blamed for all the problems of the Russian peasantry. Then, of course, there was the Holocaust. We already know what happened there. And then we get to contemporary anti-Semitism as it continues today. So it's not new. It's always been there. And I need a drink. Much better. Okay. So yeah, not new. And then, let's see, we get to a little bit more Jewish history. Specifically, I wanted to talk about the history of Jews in the Soviet Union. Because when we talk about what happened in Germany, we know what happened to the Jews in Germany. And for that matter, the Jews in all of Europe during that time. After all, Germany took Poland, Germany took France, Germany took all the little countries around there. They put all the concentration camps in every other country but Germany. And they just started exterminating them wholesale. So that was Europe. And in the Middle East, of course, we have Isreal and the seat of the Jews, who have the Muslims have been trying to exterminate them since history began. In the Soviet Union, however, Jews had a bit of a mixed bag. We just saw that, the poverty among the peasantry was blamed on the Jews. But when we go through here, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Russia, Ukraine. Some Jews had it better, some Jews had it worse. Armenia, I do believe they had it okay. Azerbaijan, I don't know this one. Belarus, however, Belarus was part of the Eastern Bloc, which was, I do believe, they were host to concentration camps during World War II, and things did not get much better for them afterwards. Estonia, I do believe that they kind of made out okay, more or less. Georgia, they did okay. However, Russia, there's a lot of history there that we're not getting into. Ukraine, however, Ukraine was one of the places that was actually exterminating Jews. It says right here, during the war, 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews were killed, leaving only 40% of their population there. When Western Ukraine was taken over by Germany, the Jews were put into ghettos, then later sent to death camps where they were murdered. And so this doesn't really matter where you go in the world. All that matters is that if there were Jews there, somebody wanted them dead. And so we get to where we are now. See, this was in the Soviet Union, where Jews were still getting kind of a bad rap because of what they were, even after World War II. So we get to the ideology. Now, whether you are Muslim, whether you're Christian, if you're neither, it always seems that the Jews get blamed for everything. But it's only certain people with certain beliefs that tend to blame them for everything. People that believe the Jews have been responsible for oppressing others, or who have been, causing bad tidings for people. Like I said, the Jews being blamed for the poverty of the Russian peasantry, even though they were equally as impoverished. And that continues today, where you have people who believe that Jews are secretly in control of everything. Zionism, essentially. That they're trying to create a global Jewish state. And here's where I want to get into leftist communism. See, the interesting thing is that when we talk about anti-Semitism, a lot of people want to go to the Holocaust. And the Holocaust was not inherently anti-Semitic. And the reason I say that is because you have to understand how it came about. See, Hitler was not really an anti-Semite. Hitler was a jaded, damaged person. He had lived through World War I. He had lived through the Treaty of Versailles. And he had lived through the war-torn and economically devastated Germany. And so what happened after he took power is he needed a scapegoat. And the Jews made for a very easy scapegoat. Of course, he went after the communists too, and we discussed this before when we talked about what happened in Germany and what's kind of happening here in the US. But he needed a scapegoat. I don't necessarily know that Hitler cared about the Jews any more than they were simply an easy target. However, who I can say hated the Jews would have been Joseph Stalin. Stalin hated Jews. It's not his biggest flaw. I mean, he has many of those. However, Stalin wanted to create a stronger state, and that meant that he needed people who were loyal to him. He needed people who were loyal to him and people who were loyal to Russia. And that was it. Anybody who had any further loyalties anywhere else were a problem. And this is why we saw in the Soviet Union the deaths of literal millions. Not all of them were from starvation. I think the majority probably were. But beyond that, at a close second, was just the way he went through and exterminated people. And Jews were among them. The reason being that, you can't have people with divided loyalties. You can't be both loyal to Russia if you're also going to be loyal to God. Because what happens when, when God and the state collide? You're going to have to pick one. As it turns out, usually God wins. So he went through to do that. And of course, he was following the Leninist interpretations of Marx, where he believed the state was supreme. He believed in, the proletariat, the ownership of everything by everyone, which is to say the ownership of everything by the state, since the state reflects everyone. This was his ideology, and nothing else that did not fall into his ideology could be tolerated. Not another ideology, not another political opposition, and certainly not another religion. We have spoken before how leftism is a religion, and you cannot have competing religions in one area. Now, I talk about this because of this. It is no secret that on the left, almost everybody adheres to some form of either socialism or communism. This is one of the hallmarks of them. And it is one of the hallmarks of politics in general. Generally speaking, and we've seen the horseshoe before, I don't have one pulled up, but if you go to one end of the horseshoe, you have authoritarian fascism, and if you go to the other end of the horseshoe, you have communism. And so all the way to the left, you have these foundations in leftist communism. And when you see what everyone has done while adhering to these ideas of leftist communism, you begin to realize what's been happening here. I said before in the advertisement for this stream that people don't change, or people do change, ideas don't change. And this is one of those ideas that doesn't change. See, the fact is that you are always going to be able to find somebody who will buy into an ideology and keep it alive. Ideas don't die. Sometimes they're forgotten, but even then, it's very, very rarely that any ideas are ever truly forgotten, especially if there are records for it. And we know this because we still have a pretty good idea of how ancient civilizations work. We still have a pretty good idea of the rituals and practices done by the ancient Aztecs, Incans, and Mayans. We know primarily how the daily lives of the Egyptians went, because we have records, and so their ideas persist onwards. You don't find very many people adhering to those ideas, but there's still a few people who do. And so, as it is true with leftist communism, There will always be people who will fall into this. The problem is that when you look at things like leftist communism on its face, it sounds pretty good. Because when you talk about it, what is leftist communism? It is mass ownership, universal ownership of the means of production. Meaning that everybody will be able to eat. Everybody will have shelter because everybody will gain from the produce of the nation, of the society. It is working for yourself, for the benefit of yourself. But doing so together, so we all make it. On its face, it's a good idea. It's also about lifting up those who need the extra help. As it said, from everybody according to their means, to everybody according to their needs. Which means that if everybody has needs that must be met. But it means that you take from those who can give, even if they don't give quite as much, but you still give to them what they need. It means individual respect and dignity. Because everybody should be able to participate. It means equality. No person above anyone else. These are all very nice concepts that don't work. But it doesn't stop them from being nice concepts. And so it's very easy to buy into them. When we look at things like the minorities in Western civilization, we look at the blacks, we look at the Asians, we look at the indigenous populations, we look at Hispanics, who else? Really, when it comes to Europe, everyone's kind of a minority just because, all of the nations are so small. But regardless, we understand that premise. We talk about, sexuality and gender. We talk about equality for women. We talk about equality for the gays or the lesbians. These are all very nice sounding things, and they're very easy to get on board with. The problem comes in, though, that there are wolves in sheep's clothing. And when you are joining all the sheep, you may not be able to see them. When it came to Black Lives Matter after the death of George Floyd, everybody was in solidarity. Everybody said, let's join in. Let's change the system for the better. But there were already people who were in that group who already held communist sympathies. There were already people in that group who held Palestinian sympathies, who already hated the Jews. Because, as they said, where was it? It was not there. Yes, it was right here. Yeah, the complicated history behind BLM's solidarity with the pro-Palestinian movement. I believe it was the third paragraph. Yes. Zelly Thompson, an organizer with Black Lives Matter in Paterson, New Jersey, calls a black radical tradition. What we're seeing here is nothing new, says Thomas. And she's right. It was nothing new. They had been supporting this for a long time. But people didn't do their research. They didn't know who they were joining with. It was a knee-jerk reaction. And so they simply joined in. They gave them money. They gave them fame. They gave them property. They gave them support. They shielded them from criticism. And what did they do when they had enough of it? They did this. And they did this. Oop, that one. Because this was the goal the entire time. It's been said before with Black Lives Matter that nobody was actually helped by Black Lives Matter. Many people have talked about the damage that it has done. Not just, the physical damage done to places like Minneapolis, to places like Seattle, to places like New York. But other damage, like racial tensions, where I had stated that the US is one of the most multicultural, one of the most blended nations in the world, and they have successfully driven a wedge firmly down the middle, dividing black into white, dividing black from Hispanic, or black from pretty much everybody for that matter. They have done damage to the communities where people no longer feel safe in them by launching their attacks on, the police and the justice system as a whole by letting out criminals. They have caused people to shelter in their houses, hoping that their houses won't be next. And we have seen what a lot of that has wrought. Jews have been a major target for criminals in these places. They have been targets for abuse, they've been targets for theft, their properties have been targets for vandalism. And they support it. Because that was always the goal. Not for the entire whole, but for enough people who got up into positions of leadership, who were able to guide people, direct funding, until eventually they could come out and just openly declare their support for the mass execution of Jews. Now, what about the further implications of this? Because we've been talking a whole lot about the Jews today. But it's not just that. Keep in mind that when they throw their support behind a group like Hamas, the Jews are not the only things that Hamas doesn't like. Keep in mind that when we talk about Islam, we discussed this last week. We were talking about controversies, and we talked about the major three Abrahamic religions. In an internal level, just insularly, there's not a lot of difference between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Both of them have very similar family values. They have very similar religious values when it comes to how you should live your life. The only real difference comes into how they interact with the rest of the world. Where Christianity believes in proselytizing and peaceful conversion, Judaism just kind of wants to be left alone, actually. Islam, however, believes that anybody who is not Muslim is an infidel. And that infidels deserve either conversion or death. So it's not just the Jews that have something at stake here. They're the first ones because the hatred is just extra spicy there. But if Israel was to go down, as I stated last week, this does not stop, because it will move to other places. We have seen it in other nations. Let's see, if I had to pick out one that sticks out of my memory, two actually. Number one would be the truck in Germany. Where was that? Started with a C. And I don't remember it. But anyway, no, I don't remember it. I thought I had it. Don't remember it. But there was a truck in Germany that during a Christmas parade, a Christmas festival, something like that, a Muslim jihadist drove a truck through it, a big truck, and killed several people and murdered many others. Cologne, that was the name of it. I knew it started with a C. Cologne, Germany. There was another instance in the UK where there was a concert going on, and that was either a shooting or a bombing. I don't remember what it was. But it was done by an Islamic jihadist who basically said that these music festivals are filled with people who are living in sin, men who are not abiding by the Quran, women who are living in sin without their heads or faces covered. And so, by killing infidels, they get to secure their place in heaven. The Jews are only first. Everybody else comes afterwards. And this has actually been very funny, and I don't have it pulled up right now. I'm sure that I could. In fact, let me grab that real quick, because it is kind of hilarious. Oh wait, I spelled it wrong. It is actually... Yeah, it looks like the results below are changing quickly. I bet they are. Good enough. It's not the perfect page, but good enough. Here we go. Part of the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Queers for Palestine. It is a group of people who are under the rainbow umbrella. They're part of the LGBTQ alliance and all the other various numbers and letters that come with that. And none of these people seem to have any idea what would happen if they were to actually go over there, or if Hamas was to actually win. It's been one of the most interesting things to watch because of just what was happening here. Because these people are anti-Israeli. I don't know necessarily they're anti-Semites, but they are at the very, very least anti-Israeli. However, what they don't seem to grasp is that after Israel is gone, they're next. And this is one of those cases of, ignorance may be bliss. They think they're doing the right thing. However, it's one of those cases where if you don't actually follow politics and you don't actually know what you're signing on for, then politics will come for you. And it will come for all of them as well. And who's going to be left at that point? Who is going to save them at that point? Because it's a very interesting situation of many people are going to be sympathetic. However, do you save them from what they've done to themselves and how much damage they have done in the meantime? I don't know. And I'm not going to take sides on this one. In fact, I'm probably going to just kind of not get involved at all and let the chips fall where they may. Now, many of these people over here may be anti-Semites. Or they may simply just be anti-West. I'm not sure. But all the people who did sign on with the left because they were part of the LGBTQ umbrella, and they said, you know what? The left stands for gay rights. Okay? Well, keep in mind that while you're standing up for gay rights and you are standing up for gay representation and gay respect, you are also standing side by side with these people. And that if they win, it's your life on the line. And so maybe the key here is to understand exactly what these people are standing for, and then you can figure out where you want to stand appropriately. This is why I said it's all about the ideology. Know what you're actually following. Know what your own ideology is, and then find other people who agree with it. But do your homework first. Many of these people went for the facade. They went for the visage of what they thought was going to be activism and equal rights. And they got this. And who do they have to blame? Themselves. And so that's why they're calling it the Great Betrayal. But it's not really a betrayal. Instead, it's the fact that these people existed before, They always have. And you stood with them. And now you reap what you sown. This is a good thing, though, because, as we pointed out, places like this, places like Wall Street, are actually banning these people from working. Meaning that these people will now have to take a long, hard look at their lives and determine which is more valuable to them. Is it the society that they live in and the ability to work, to own a home, to raise a family? Or is it the ideology they supported? What are they going to be? Are they going to be citizens, or are they going to be zealots? Because you can't be both. And all of these universities are going to learn a very hard lesson, because they are now put in a position of they can do one of two things. They can continue on as they are. They can continue to teach propaganda. They can continue to teach indoctrination. They can teach hatred, and they can stand on their own. Or they can realize that they are a part of this society, and they can correct their course and maybe restore some of the goodwill that they had before. And the same thing is true here. All of these people who have found themselves in league with people who hate them and want them dead now have a few choices to make. It's where do they go? In this case, with this woman named Rose, she says, "I'm not changing my values, but screw the allyship. I will not stop fighting because I believe in the causes themselves. But as for going out of my way to support, to post, to give my money, I'm done." She's done with groups like Black Lives Matter. She's done with groups like the ADL. She's done with groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so she will find other people who, like her, believe in somewhat more liberal causes, like equal rights for everybody, regardless of race, regardless of gender. But as far as the activism goes, and as far as, just blindly adhering to what these people do, she's not going to do it anymore. And that's where a lot of people are right now. And that's where you probably are right now. Because this is probably not the first time that you've come across this. This is the most prominent kind because, again, Isreal, and Isreal is the great divider. But more than likely, you have come across things in your lifetime where you have said, I'm part of a group and I don't agree with what the group is doing. And then you have three choices. You can try to change the group, you can stay quiet, or you can leave. I know that I've had groups like that I've been a part of. They did things I didn't want to. Maybe you just had friends when you were in high school who were doing things that you didn't agree with, and you decided to find new friends. It's not that different. It's really not. Maybe you found, or you had a friend and then found out that your friend was a criminal who breaks into cars at night. Maybe it's a bit of an extreme example, but regardless. You learn that the people you threw your lot in with are not the people you thought they were. Now, in terms of your friend, maybe there was no way for you to know that until they got caught or you caught them doing it. But in terms like this, yeah, all it takes is a little bit of research. Ignorance may be bliss, but it is not an excuse. Because you can do something about it. And so going forward, make sure that you do your research before you actually support anything. It's important. Know what you're getting into before you do it. And with that, I don't really have much else to say on the matter. So I think that's a good place for us to kind of wrap it up here. So let me go ahead and take that down because we don't need that anymore. I saw the article earlier in the week and I had to say something because it's one of those cases where a lot of people, myself included, have been trying to talk about this for years now. talking about what's happening in society. And then you get these other people who something happens and they do the surprised Pikachu face. And they say, I don't understand. And then people like myself have to stand off to the side and say, I warned you. I told you so. I tried to talk you out of it. But you didn't listen. This is my way of trying to get to a whole bunch of people before the next event happens and say, I'm telling you so. Okay? I'm trying to educate you so that you can make better decisions. In this case, better decisions about who you associate with. I'm not going to tell people not to do it. After all, we have freedom of association. That doesn't mean that we can't do better. So with that, I am going to go ahead and take a break here. Let's see. Tuck says, today I learned that my friend was a rogue. Sad day to be a paladin. Now, hold on. Before we get out of here, this is normally something I would say for my tabletop stream, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and include it here. If your friend is a rogue, and you're a paladin, that does not necessarily mean that you have to take your rogue in for justice. If you are a paladin and your friend is a rogue, all you have to do is say, I am going to stay in the party with the rogue to make sure the rogue does not commit any crimes. And with one simple statement, you have ensured that your lawful good paladin and your chaotic neutral rogue can stay in the same party together. See? It's not all doom and gloom today. I just gave you some valuable advice. Tux also says, it feels like some people have to die before some people listen, and a lot still don't. That is true. When I try to encourage people to think about their associations and think about the ideologies they get involved with, most people will not. The vast majority will not. But that does not mean that we still do not, we still don't try. Still do try? We still try. I mean, it's kind of like if you look up churches. If you look up churches around the world, you will find churches, actual churches, cathedrals, in the middle of Saudi Arabia. Who are they preaching to? I don't know, but the fact is they're still there and they're still trying. And if they can do that in the middle of Saudi Arabia, I can do this here. And so I will. So with that done, there will not be a lecture next week. Next week I will be busy at a food pantry helping to hand out food. So I cannot do the lecture on that morning because it takes place at the same time the lecture normally is. So nothing next week. The Sunday stream will still be on next week. The Sunday stream is still going on tomorrow. We're going to be starting on the Tau because I like Tau. They're fun. So we're going to be doing that. And other than that, I guess that's it. So I will say, if you want to hear more things like this, if you want to be here for further lectures, further tabletop streams, videos in general, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. That way you're here for everything. You get notified for everything at least, or most things at least. I get the feeling there's probably not a lot of notifications going out for this stream. Yeah. Oh well, worse things have happened. But just in case it is not being notified, or no one is being notified of it, if you know somebody who might use this lecture, or who could use this lecture and might actually listen to it, share it with them. Because it's probably the only way this is getting out. But otherwise though, if you just like me and you want to show me some love, leave a like on the video, leave comments down below, join the Discord server if you want to. You can come and yell at me there. That's always fun. You can yell at me. So come and join the Discord server. Otherwise though, I will see you next time for, I don't know, I got 2 weeks until the next lecture. I'll find something. And until then, take care.